Welcome to the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers Spotlight on the Issues webinar series. I'm your host, Jason Modglin, the president of the Alliance. It's great to be with you today. The Texas Alliance of Energy Producers represents over 2,600 individuals and member companies that are focused on advancing independent operators and the standards of the Texas oil and gas industry through advocacy for smart energy and environmental policy, effective communications, and cost-saving insurance programs. The Alliance delivers for our members. I want to thank Noble Royalties for being our title sponsor today. As a leader in minerals and royalties since 1997, Noble urges you as an E&P or a mineral fund to rethink how you buy and sell your minerals. Let their legacy and reputation show that they are committed to providing sustainable, creative solutions to E&Ps and private owners alike on how best to maximize their mineral ownership in this changing market. Reach out to Chase Morris and Shannon Manor at Noble Royalties to discuss what is changing in the minerals market and how Noble continues to be a reliable resource to companies and owners across the lower 48. I would now like to call on our board chairman, Cy Wagner, to get us started. She is a dynamic leader, a second-generation oil producer, an Aggie petroleum engineer who is at the helm of her family's 40-year oil and gas business in Fort Worth. Cy, would you make a few remarks?
Thanks, Jason. Sure, I'd like to welcome everybody here today and thank you to the board for logging in to another one of our great webinars. We appreciate your participation and always happy to have your feedback after these events that our staff puts on. Very excited to hear what Congressman Arrington has to say today. As most of you know from these events where Jason and I get to talk about all the things that matter not only to our industry, but to our membership and the large and small companies that we represent. Congressman Arrington sure works on behalf of those companies. And as a fifth-generation farmer and rancher as well, I'm very interested in everything he does for the agricultural world as well. So very grateful to him and his service and happy to be here today. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Cy, very much. And we're contacting the congressman's office to pull him out of a Ways and Means subcommittee hearing right now. So what I'll do is I'll jump in with his bio and he'll be with us very shortly. So as Cy mentioned, our guest today is Congressman Jodey Arrington. And Cy, thank you very much for those remarks and thank you to our board members for attending. I also saw Judy Stark with the Panhandle Producers and Royalty Owners Association. Judy, thank you very much for joining us today. So our Congressman, Jodey Arrington, he was raised in Plainview, Texas. He's the son of a tractor salesman and a school teacher. Graduated from Texas Tech University, worked for Governor and then President George W. Bush. He returned to West Texas after that stint in Washington, D.C., where he was vice chancellor of the Texas Tech University system before taking the helm as president of a healthcare innovation company in Lubbock. He's in his third term in Congress and continues to be an outspoken advocate for reining in the federal government, promoting agriculture and energy, strengthening national security, and respecting the Constitution. He serves on the most powerful committee in Congress, the Committee on Ways and Means. Just a fact here, dates back to 1789 and has the broadest legislative jurisdiction, including tax, trade, healthcare, social security, and welfare. He's on the subcommittee on select revenue measures, trade, and social security. He further serves the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world by working as co-chairman of the Rural Healthcare Task Force. He leads a bipartisan congressional delegation on fixing the national debt and reforming the federal budget process, and he co-chairs the Congressional Term Limits Caucus. In addition, he was appointed to a second term as deputy chair of the National Republican Congressional Committee. In 2021, he was appointed to the U.S. Congressional Joint Economic Committee by House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. This is a bicameral congressional committee tasked with reviewing economic conditions and recommending improvements to economic policy. He and his wife, Ann, and their 3 children really embody humble public service. If you would like to submit a question to the congressman, please utilize the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We will go till 10:30 and wrap up with a few audience questions. And as I mentioned, he's got to get back to a subcommittee hearing. Well, there you are, Congressman. Welcome, and thanks for being with us. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Doesn't matter how many times you do this, you're always going to have that moment where you forgot to do the basic thing, like turn on your computer and then turn off mute. Great to be with you. This is the Church of Climatology retreat that you asked me to speak at, right? Or is this a different? No. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Texas Alliance for Energy Producers. God bless Texas, man. And thank you for your leadership. I join you and your members and your team as a partner to be a loud and proud voice for the food, fuel, and fiber producers of Texas, namely fuel producers, and what they're doing to turn the cranks of the greatest economy in the world. I think it's underappreciated. I think that's going to change, unfortunately, probably the hard way, but it's underappreciated what the abundant and affordable source of fuel for our economy does to make us the great economy and the envy of the world. Yeah. And I think it's also underappreciated how affordable energy affects our daily lives in terms of just putting gas in the car or heating and cooling our homes. And then I think when you stop to think about it, and I don't know that I would have, Jason, if I weren't in this role, but all the petroleum-based products that have given us the standard of living and quality of life that we're used to in our country that is unmatched by any other, I would say you and your members are part of an industry that has contributed a great deal of value to our nation. And I haven't even gotten to energy independence and what that does for national security. So
that's right.
I feel blessed. I thank God that I get to wear the West Texas jersey here in our nation's capital. And for such a time as this, because these are trying times for our country, for our traditional American values, and for an industry that has done so much for the Lone Star State and for the United States. And I think there's tremendous misinformation and misunderstanding. I think we have failed in decades past, not just last year or the last few years, to really promote to policymakers and to the public why fossil fuels are such an important part of our lives, our economy, and our security. And also how we lead the world in stewarding our environmental impact and the impact on public health, leading in carbon reduction, greenhouse gas reduction, and overall air pollutant reduction. Again, unsurpassed, unparalleled relative to our competitors and adversaries. So it's a story I love to tell. I wish I were as articulate as you, Jason, and as smart as you, but I'm a warrior for West Texas, which means I'm a warrior for independent oil and gas producers and that ecosystem. And there are absolutely some unique challenges that are unprecedented for this industry right here and right now that we must win. And I do think we'll win the House back, by the way, just to speak a little bit politically here. There's a 5-seat margin in the House. And obviously the Green New Deal ideology and these, I think, very extreme environmental policies to follow are obviously being promoted in the Democrat Party. Not all Democrats subscribe to the apocalyptic destruction of the universe on account of carbon emissions, but the radical tail wags the dog, and one way to cut that off is to get the majority back in the House, which I think we will do. And I think part of the reason we saw a microcosm of it in Kendra Horn and Sochi Torres, both from the I shouldn't say iron triangle because that always has a negative connotation, but both from the epicenter of energy production on the fossil conventional side, they're no longer with us. We have Republicans now who I'm close with, but you're going to see more of that. I think it's because of the overreach and I think people are open to all the above. I think people are wanting a balanced view of protecting our resources, stewarding and growing our economy. And that's not happening. And it's, I think that my colleagues in the Democrat Party will probably end up in the wilderness for 40 years as a result. That's as much as I like some of them, I must say, I'm kind of hoping that is the case.
Well, and we like when American producers are selected and prioritized. And we pulled you out of a Ways and Means subcommittee hearing this morning that was talking about trade in countries that utilize forced labor. Just some shocking statistics about 75 countries that are in our supply chains that utilize forced labor. And this is a really important energy and agriculture issue. Because sometimes we see domestic producers undermined by these other countries. I'd love just to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I think if you look closely enough, I think some of the violations of that particular trade principle of the United States, which is a longstanding one on forced labor, is in the renewable sector. It's in a number of others, even cotton, and we are the largest cotton patch around Lubbock, Texas. And look, we stand on those principles. If America doesn't, nobody else will. That's part of the problem, is to get other countries to come along with us. But free trade is a hallmark of our of prosperity for all peoples in all countries, and especially the United States. So in addition to keeping markets free from overly burdensome, unnecessary, and even unconstitutional regulations and tax burdens, we need open and fair trade, or open and free trade that is fair, where we have investors, for example, in Mexico and other countries, helping develop energy assets there that will no doubt be a benefit to those countries and to the Western Hemisphere and to North America. And so, we have to make sure that we follow through, and that the execution of these deals, like USMCA, for example, is being enforced as we intended it and as we articulated it in the various provisions. And I'm very concerned about that, and whether or not we're going to, because it has to work in implementation, or it's no more value than the paper it's written on. And we can't take that great free trade agreement with our largest and most important partners and neighbors and use it to open up new markets around the globe. So there's so many elements to trade, but no doubt Ways and Means is the place to be, not only on the tax side that affects every company, but for ag and energy and opening new markets, making sure China makes good on that purchase agreement, for example, and their phase 1 structural reforms. The list goes on. I don't want to just keep going, but just to say, we've got our work cut out for us. And while we celebrated USMCA as this great bipartisan endeavor, and we should, it is much fairer. It's more modernized. Our investors will have greater access. We'll have less regulatory rigmarole in the flow of products on the hydrocarbon side, but we got to enforce it. We got to make sure that Ambassador Tai is serious about it. And that they don't let this Green New ideology corrupt those codified provisions that again will be a blessing to all involved. And I've made sure, Ambassador Ty, that was my first conversation with her in private, my first conversation with her as in a Ways and Means hearing. And it is the first letter I wrote to her, and I plan on being very close, in very close contact with her from here on out. She will be, we will be on a first name basis, and she'll be able to call me collect.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, we would hate to see USMCA be eroded by the new administration down there. And so pressure on Ambassador Todd to make sure that Mexico lives up to their end of the bargain is fantastic for energy companies and service companies and producers selling into Mexico to make sure that those products can get there.
Jason,
yes, sir.
just on that front, you know, very specifically, that there's a power industry law, there's a Mexican hydrocarbons law, there are sort of edicts from the president on permitting that is truncated that to like a 5-year versus a 20 to 25 year. These are serious violations, and we're calling for a basically dispute resolution panel to be activated. That's already happened with Canada, believe it or not, on the dairy side. That was one of the big, you know, problems to solve. But I've talked to the Mexican ambassador. I've talked to the business community in a sort of a virtual CODEL. I just want your folks to know we are on top of it. We're very concerned. It's not just me. Other members are expressing this, and I'm not. I think we have Democrats who are, you know, in the same camp in terms of having them fulfill their obligations, but they're giving more, sort of tilting the scales again towards their state-owned Pemexes of the world, and they're discriminating against American investors and investment and American assets, and they are rolling back sort of more transparency and competition rules and policies that they had in place to make their markets, I think, anti-competitive as it relates to their friends and neighbors and partners in America. That's not a good way to keep the train on the tracks and this deal alive and well. And they need it as much as we do. So I long for the days of a president like Trump who will rattle not only his saber, but rattle their cages to the point that he gets their attention. So we don't know how it's going to play out, but there are plenty of us that are going to be pushing.
Well, and on that congressional delegation, just want to thank you again for the invitation for our chairman, Cy Wagner, to meet with you and Congressman Vicente Gonzalez to really talk with leaders in Mexico about the importance of maintaining those trade agreements. And again, thank you for the invitation for her to join that.
You bet.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your summit that you had in June, a rural summit on food, fuel, and fiber hosted there at Texas Tech Universities. Thank you for the opportunity to moderate a panel with you, Commissioner Christian, and other congressional leaders. If you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about the event and some of your takeaways from it.
You bet. Well, first of all, you did a great job, which is, we knew you would, and that's why you were our moderator on the energy panel, which was an excellent conversation. And you also I asked you to participate in a Western Caucus meeting and sort of hearing, if you will, roundtable discussion. And you just absolutely crushed it, as we say in West Texas. You crushed it. So I'm a big fan of yours, and my goal is to be as smart and articulate so I can be a champion and actually get the right results up here. That's ultimately all of our goal. If we can't keep intangible drilling costs, if we can't keep that in the tax code, and if we can't enforce these trade agreements, et cetera, et cetera. If we cannot beat back the repeal of the stepped up basis, which would be horrible for both our ag and energy producers who are family owned, then you know, it doesn't matter how well we sing and whistle. And we're going to have to win hearts and minds in the long run. But right now, you know, it's a good old fashioned bare knuckle brawl just to survive this tempestuous time. Yeah, look, we had great group of congressional leaders from the Texas delegation. We had the future ag chairman of the ag committee and GT Thompson from Pennsylvania. We had community leaders from all over West Texas. And then we had my dear friend and a guy I look up to and have learned a lot from, who is now our departing former chairman, Kevin Brady from the great state of Texas. You can't underestimate, guys. You can't overestimate it. You just can't overestimate what he has meant to our sort of formula for American prosperity, which is freedom, and as a defender of our conventional fuels, that's been the center pole in the tent on our prosperity. So economic prosperity. So we honored him in West Texas. He was super excited to be there, and we talked about you know, all the things that I've mentioned and the successes we've had in recent past and the challenges we have today. There are certainly opportunities, but we're going to have to figure out how to work together in a bipartisan fashion. And the administration they really have to lead in that, because whatever tone they set is hard to overcome. And infrastructure is one element I haven't mentioned. We've talked about freer markets and fairer trade. We've talked about the tax code and the current threats in the Biden proposals. At least I mentioned one. I didn't mention depletion allowance. That's another one. And just the overall raising of taxes and what that does to working families and what that does to our competitiveness. But the infrastructure deal should have been from the outset, like it has for 20, 50, 100 years, a bipartisan undertaking, but it's gotten caught up, unfortunately, in the sort of tax and spend grab bag, and instead of focusing on traditional infrastructure, it's gotten carried away. I think, again, the Green New Deal acolytes are a big part of driving that. So I don't know that the Democrats can even get the the big $3.5 trillion tax and spend plan apart from infrastructure. I don't think the votes are there for them. They're splintered in every different way, including the Senate, not just House, but also Senate. I'm happy about that because I think we saw unprecedented prosperity and growth and job creation and competitiveness when we reduced taxes. I am hopeful that the Senate can get things pulled back together on the bipartisan infrastructure agreement. The pay-fors are, I think, they're under scrutiny by my Republicans. I'm grateful for that. They kicked out the sort of IRS, let's give IRS more money to close the tax gap in enforcement. So we'll see what happens there, but we certainly need our ports. There are other issues beyond that, like the bureaucracy and the reform we need for the Corps of Engineers, but also more delegation to states. I mean, a lot of the money is coming from the private sector and from Texas and from these communities, port communities, whether it's Houston or Corpus or Galveston. We just have to cut through some of the red tape to let them move on to widen and deepen their channels, for example. So anyway, great opportunities there, very bipartisan opportunities if we can just pry it loose from the caustic environment around the big tax and spend $3.5 trillion deal.
Well, and thank you for mentioning Congressman Brady. With his retirement, you become the senior Texas member on Ways and Means, and really it's a critical time. You already talked about the prospects that the majority and the president want to raise taxes. So many of our members, independent operators, small business owners, they're also landowners, part of multi-generational ag operations as well. And you've been a leader on addressing stepped up basis as well. I want to give you just a few minutes to talk about that, because that's an issue that kind of crosses purposes for some of our members.
Yeah, well, the list is long of nefarious, anti-competitive, I think even unfair and un-American provisions that are being kicked around for changing the tax code. I think probably the most unfair and un-American is the death tax in general. These folks, your members, they've been paying property tax out the nose, and they've been paying sales taxes and franchise taxes, and what, you know, they've been paying all their taxes. For the current administration to propose at transfer, you know, upon transfer to the next generation, to these folks, your members' children, their assets, where they would have to, where they would double the cap gains and have to immediately pay the unrealized capital gains at twice the rate immediately upon transfer. It's untenable. It's unrealistic for, I know the ag industry and my family farmers, I don't know one of them that can afford to pay those taxes without selling their family operation, multi-generational family farming operation and ranching operation. And I'm sure your landowners are not any better shape. So we're trying to beat that one back. I talked to Secretary Yellen I talked to her. I was at a hearing, and that was my, you know, you don't have time to cover everything, but I've been on every letter. We've been part of lots of conversations, but she said she wanted to make the tax code fairer. And I asked her to explain that one to me, but not to me, explain it to my independent energy and ag producers and landowners in Texas. So she couldn't, and they can't. And I hope we can beat that one back. But again, you look at the ordinary and necessary business expense deductions and the with the intangible drilling costs, which we got to change the name of that, because I think that's a problem, because it just puts a big target on us. Nobody understands what that means, and it's just ordinary, necessary. It's comparable, you know, business deduction for small businesses who happen to be in the energy sector and providing energy independence and affordable supply of fuel for our lives and economy. And then you've got the intangible drilling, not the intangible drilling cost, depletion allowance. So it's just basic depreciation that everyone else enjoys. So we've got to figure out a way to, maybe my reform will be to change the name so that it just blends in with all the other businesses, small businesses that enjoy these, the tax breaks that beget more investment and more economic benefit and job creation for our country and for our region.
That's right. They're in no way subsidies. They're standard deductions that every domestic business has and can afford to have. You know, on percentage depletion, the National Stripper Well Association, with the help of the Alliance's petroleum economist Carr Ingham, estimated the loss of percentage depletion would result in 47,000 Texas jobs lost over a 15-year period, and an average loss of 90 million a year to the state treasury. So it has very tangible impacts on the state of Texas and really rural areas in the state that would be negatively impacted.
No question. I think this is I took to the floor, you and I visited actually before I went to the floor to really get a better understanding of the methane gas rule that was rolled back and now being the Trump sort of methane gas rule, which was different than the Obama 11th hour sort of redundant regulation on the methane gas seepage. You were very helpful. And then we took to the floor. What I didn't tell you, after explaining its de minimis effects to the environment when it comes to this rule and independent producers, I talked about the disastrous economic effects in rural communities and among the smaller producers who produce, by the way, what, like 90% of our oil and gas output. So I, with the help of you, Jason, I've been able to tell that story. And you know what happened, which is a beautiful thing. Your members need to be encouraged by this. My friend, who happens to be a Democrat, who is also my co-chair in the debt caucus, which is my greatest concern for our country. Absolutely my greatest concern. I won't get into all of it, but I'm sure your producers, as great Americans, patriots, and parents of children and grandchildren, are concerned about the $30 trillion debt and climbing and what that's going to do one day to on the heads of our children and for future our future exceptionalism and leadership in the world. That said, Scott Peters from San Diego is my co-chair, and we work very collegially, and I like him. And he was on the floor. He's an energy and commerce leader for his party and on that committee. And he was there debating the methane gas rule. So I gave my debate speech, and he came across the floor, and we shook hands and kind of hugged, did a little, Texas hug. And because we were on the other side of this deal and we were working together, and this was the first time we've been on the other side of the energy. And he said, you know what, you make some good points, and maybe we need to do a carve out for the smaller guys. I don't want to hurt those guys. And you made a good point about the multinational big energy companies and how most of their production isn't even domestic anyway. So a lot of it won't hit them and they can absorb the cost. And he said, I think that's an important perspective, and we need to work on that. Maybe we can work together on that. So, sometimes it's just damage control, but those relationships and those friendships really do bear fruit. And I'm a wild West Texas cowboy, and I make no apologies for my further right ideological view, which is just simply a view of free markets, free people, free and sovereign state view, a limited government view of it's just a constitutional view of how we should govern our country. However, I think you don't have to be a jerk about it. You don't have to know it all about it. You don't have to be, that guy. And if you can just shake some people's hands, and if you can show some respect, and if mutual respect, and if you can love your neighbor, you can actually forge some friendships that'll help us in the long run. Sometimes it's just damage control, unfortunately, but I'll take that over the destruction of our independent oil and gas industry.
Well, that's fantastic, and I mean it's music to our ears to hear those kind of cross aisle conversations and making sure that both sides are working together for domestic producers, and we appreciate your leadership and work there. I know we pulled you out of a committee hearing. Any closing thoughts for our members before we let you get back to your hearing?
Well, I'm just glad I filibustered to the point that your members didn't get to ask me any questions, or maybe they gave them all to you to ask. But I think just some thoughts. This is one of those. I'm just speaking from off the cuff and from my heart. I'm not. I think we can measure the 6 pollutants. In the Clean Air Act, we've done a phenomenal job as a country. And you have all the statistics. Your people have heard them all. We've done a great job of stewarding environmental and human health as we have kept this the land of opportunity. I I know that this can be perceived or misperceived as a knuckle dragging caveman view of the world, but I'm not bought into the carbon that carbon is driving climate change. I understand that we all contribute as humans in industrial activity to the emission of greenhouse gases, but I think it's incredibly premature and dangerous to buy into the premise and the problem as the Green New Deal alarmist, climate alarmists, as they define the problem. It's urgent. It's global destruction, and it requires massive, radical transformation of everything related to our economy and our lives. Other than that, it doesn't have any effect on our country or our. So you got to be real careful about buying into that. That said, Jason, here's the struggle I have. And I've got as many facts and figures and science to support that it is a natural cycle of change in the climate. And don't get me wrong, where we can reduce emissions, too much of anything is bad. So, but I won't get into the philosophical sort of state partnerships with industry, incentives, innovation. Okay, everybody knows Republicans think that way. Here's my tension, big tension. I think this alarmist view and this pervading ideology, and it is pervading the country and our culture, is absolutely the tip of the spear for the socialist policies and that we're seeing, and truly a transformation with more concentration of power in our government. And socialism is the control of the means of production. And if you control the food and fuel supply chain, I mean, I don't know how long before we're taking to the streets like Cubans demanding our freedoms back. Now, all that said, Jason, the culture's changed. I read the surveys and the polls. The American people have bought into this. It doesn't matter what I think. At some point, the public, shareholders, boards, but the public has spoken, and consumers, and they actually believe more of what I just said than I even dreamed that they would believe. I mean, like 7 out of 10, if you just go across and average all age groups and demographics, 7 out of 10 believe we ought to have intervention for this very urgent problem and significant intervention. So at some point, I have to figure out, while I'm fighting this ideology and religion and the zeal thereof, I've got to. There is a viewpoint that says you might have to accept a little of the reality that that's where the public is. Public is driving politics and politics policy. So it's like we can forge some sort of like how do we reduce some of this, whether I think it's going to be the end of the world or not, in a way that doesn't destroy the economy, in a way that doesn't destroy our industry, and in a way that leverages innovation, in a way that doesn't give the keys to China and Russia. I think that's practical problem solving, and that's the reality of where we are. I struggle with that, but I try to balance that as best I can. So that's kind of a debate I would like to have with your members, because some of the cows are out of the barn. Some of them we may be able to put back. And here's my last point. When people are paying $5 at the pump or whatever it is, it doesn't take $5, but when they're paying more at the pump, when the working people who can't even make ends meet today are paying more energy prices at their homes, I think at that point you're going to have a real swing back in the view of things. And, when Switzerland was voting on the Paris Climate Accord rules and their sort of regulations that they would have to take on as a result of being part of Paris, they actually put a price at the pump with it and a surcharge on airline tickets. When their citizens had that trade-off, before them, the real opportunity cost to them, they rejected it.
Absolutely.
The problem is we borrow and we deficit fund everything. So we're living in a fantasy world. So I do think ultimately that the prices will force consumers to take a different view. I hate that it's going to get to that, but it may very well. Anyway, way too long. God bless West Texas. Thank you for your strong leadership, Jason, and thank your members for all their support. Stay in the game, guys. This is the big one.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman, and great comments. And we agree 100% on price driving a lot of these decisions. Even the University of Houston recently did a poll, very high percentage wanted intervention on climate change. What they were willing to pay for it, about $1 a day. So that doesn't buy you much of a cup of coffee these days. So
those socialists are cheapskates. That may be our only way out of this deal.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Congressman. We'll let you go. I want to let everyone know that Congressman Arrington can be found on the web at jodeyarrington.com and on social media. He frequently puts up his videos from committee or from the floor. Would highly encourage you to view those and to share those. And again, want to thank Noble Royalties for being our sponsor today. We ask that you consider Noble Royalties as you consider your business needs for your family or your company. Oh, there you go. You got your Texas Tech guns up, football going there.
Hey, I'm going to sign off, Jason. Blessings. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you very much, Congressman. If you're interested in sponsoring future events, we want to hear from you and let you know that the Alliance's annual conference is right around the corner. We've really put together a fantastic group of speakers. Please visit our website today to reserve your tickets, to sponsor, or to attend. It's going to be held at the Hotel Drover in the historic Fort Worth Stockyards, September 14th and 15th. And keynote speakers include Chris Wright, CEO of Liberty Oilfield Services, Mike Howard, CEO of Howard Energy Partners, and Railroad Commission Chairman Christy Craddock, and many others. We're going to have a fantastic time and really would like to see you in Fort Worth here in a couple months. Thank you for joining us. Please be sure to fill out the exit survey so we can make these events even better. Have a great day.